The first thing I am each morning is not Elara. I am a hollow space, a vessel for the quiet. Before the memory of the rejection, before the chill of the stone floor seeps through my thin blanket, there is only this, a conscious, deliberate nothingness. It is the only peace I am permitted. Then the world intrudes. A wolf howls in the distance, a beta on dawn patrol, his cry a vibrant thread in the pack's tapestry of sound, and just like that, the memory dulled by years sharpens its claws and finds the familiar tender spot in my soul. His face, the cold, practiced indifference in his eyes as he looked at me, his destined mate, and saw nothing. The silence in the clearing, thick and suffocating, before he spoke the words that carved me out of my own life. I, Cassian, reject you, Elara. You are nothing. You are no one. The words don't hurt with their original searing intensity anymore. Now they are a weight. A lodestone sewn into my spirit, pulling me down, down, into the earth where I belong. I am the rejected Omega, not a person, but a consequence, a lesson for others. I rose from my pallet in the servants' quarters, my movements silent and economical. My room was a forgotten closet near the storage cellars, smelling of earth, dried roots, and my own failure. The darkness was my ally. It hid me. By the time the main pack was stirring, I was already a ghost among them, carrying water from the well. I kept my eyes lowered, my shoulders slightly curved, a permanent posture of submission. It was a language they all understood, and it was the only one I was safe to speak. A young warrior, all coiled strength and brash confidence, strode past. His arm, swinging wide in conversation with his friend, clipped my shoulder. The impact was minor, but it sent a jolt of pure panic through my system. My heart, that traitorous, frantic bird, beat wildly against my ribs. "Watch it, Omega!" He grunted, not even breaking his stride. He didn't say it with malice. That was the true humiliation. It was an automatic response, a reflex. One didn't feel malice toward a rock one stubbed a toe on. One simply cursed its existence and moved on. I am a rock, I told myself, the old mantra rising. I am a shadow. I am nothing. I am no one. The words were a cage, but they were also a shield. As long as I was nothing, I could not be hurt. As long as I was no one, I could not be rejected again. I finished my tasks with mechanical precision. Draw water, mend the torn hunting leathers, gather the kindling. Each chore was a brick in the wall I built daily around myself. But today, the silence within me felt different, not peaceful, but heavy, aching. My feet, without conscious command, carried me away from the bustling heart of the pack, down a game trail long overgrown. This was my secret, my sin. A small clearing where the sunlight broke through the canopy in dusty golden shafts, illuminating a patch of soft emerald moss and a single ancient lightning-struck oak. Here I could breathe. The air didn't taste of pack smoke and judgment. I sank onto the moss, the tension in my shoulders easing a fraction. I closed my eyes, and for the first time all day, I stopped fighting. I turned my attention inward toward the hollow space I worked so hard to maintain, and I reached for her. "Are you there?" It wasn't a voice, it was a feeling, a question sent down a frayed and fragile tether. For a long moment, there was only the vast, echoing silence of my own emptiness. Then a flicker, a wash of profound, soul-deep weariness, a glimmer of silver light, so faint it was more a memory of light than light itself. It was her. The part of me they had all called defective, the part of me I had been forced to hide, to suppress, to lock away since I was a child, my wolf, my true self. She was not a raging, powerful spirit straining at her chains. The legends spoke of silver wolves as forces of nature, celestial and fierce. What was left of mine was a ghost, a wisp of smoke. When our connection stirred, I didn't feel power. I felt a love so immense and a sorrow so bottomless, it threatened to drown me. It was the emotional equivalent of a weak hand pressed against the inside of my skin, a silent plea. I'm sorry, I thought, the guilt a bitter taste in my mouth. I'm so sorry. It's safer this way. Safer for whom? A voice that was both mine and not mine whispered back. It was always a question I dared not answer. Safer for the pack, who would not know what to do with a creature of myth in their midst. Or safer for me, because to let her out, to truly feel the magnitude of what we were, it felt like it would unmake me. To be that seen, that powerful, that real, was a terror far greater than any rejection. Another howl rippled through the forest, this one closer. A young shifter, probably, revelling in the new, raw connection to their animal. The The sound was a physical ache in my chest, a longing so sharp it was akin to grief. That joy, that unity, that wholeness, it was the birthright they had convinced me I was unworthy of, and in my cowardice I had agreed with them. The flicker of silver within me faded, the tether going slack. She was gone, retreated back into the prison I maintained for us both. The silence she left behind was the loudest sound in the world. The sun had climbed higher. My moment of stolen peace was over. I stood, brushing the moss from my worn grey dress. I could feel the walls of my cage settling back into place, not just around my wolf, but around my heart, my mind, my very soul. I turned my back on the clearing and walked toward the pack. With each step, I rehearsed my nothingness. I softened my footsteps until they made no sound. I lowered my gaze until I saw only the dirt path. I quieted my breathing until I was, for all intents and purposes, invisible. The ghost was returning to her haunt. Each step away from the clearing was a conscious act of self-burial. With every footfall on the well-trodden path back to the heart of the Frostfang Pack, I rebuilt the walls. I lowered my gaze from the dappled canopy to the dirt, softened my footsteps until they were silent, and pulled the familiar cloak of nothingness tight around my shoulders. By the time the wooden longhouses came into view, the hollow peace of the clearing was a distant memory, replaced by the familiar low hum of my own anxiety. But the pack's energy was different today. It wasn't the usual rhythm of calls and patrols. A sharp electric current of excitement crackled in the air, setting my teeth on edge. I slipped through the bustling crowd, a minnow in a suddenly turbulent stream, my senses overloaded. Alpha King himself. Do you think he's here to choose a mate? They say his power is like a physical force. The whispers swirled around me, each one a stone of dread in my stomach. The Alpha King. The words alone carried a weight that threatened to crush my carefully maintained composure. A royal visit meant scrutiny. It meant every member of the pack, down to the lowest omega, would be on display. It meant my fragile invisibility was in greater peril than ever before. I threw myself into work with a frantic intensity, hoping the chaos would be my camouflage. I hauled water from the well until my arms trembled, the physical burn a welcome distraction from the panic fluttering in my chest. I scrubbed the stone floor of the greeting area until the skin of my knuckles was scraped raw, focusing on the swirl of grit in the water, on the repetitive motion, anything to keep from thinking about the storm of power about to descend upon us. The announcement came just as the sun began its descent, a single clear horn blast that sliced through the chatter, bringing an instant, tense silence. The pack surged toward the main entrance, a wave of eager bodies. I let myself be carried to the very back, finding a sliver of space behind the woodpile, a vantage point that offered a view while keeping me shrouded in shadow. I expected a spectacle, a thunder of hooves, an entourage of fearsome warriors, a display of raw, intimidating power. What arrived was silence. He walked into our midst alone, no guards, no fanfare, just a man. Alpha King Kael. He was taller than any wolf I had ever seen. His presence not a shout, but a low, resonant hum that demanded the very air still around him. His hair was the colour of wet bark, his features hewn from granite and patience. But it was his eyes that arrested me. They were a stormy, weary grey, and as they swept across the gathered pack, I saw no interest in the posturing of our warriors, no admiration for the simpering smiles of the unmated females. He looked bored. Profoundly, bone-deeply tired of the pageantry. Our Alpha Borin stepped forward, his chest puffed out, and began a long, florid speech of welcome. I watched Kael's face. I saw the minute tightening of his jaw, the almost imperceptible flicker of his gaze toward the forest, as if longing for its simplicity. He was a man who saw the pretense, and it wearied him. This was more dangerous than I could have imagined. My defences were built against open hostility and casual cruelty. Not this piercing perception. I felt exposed, even from my hidden post. I needed to leave. Now, I shifted my weight, preparing to melt back into the trees. A single dry twig beneath my foot let out a soft snap. The sound was infinitesimal, lost beneath Borin's droning voice. But Kael's head turned. His gaze, which had slid over the crowd with dismissive ease, stopped. It bypassed the warriors, the elders, the hopeful she-wolves, and landed squarely on me, a half-visible shape in the shadows. Time fractured. The world dissolved into a roar of static in my ears, my breath locked in my chest, my mantra screamed in my head. Nothing, be nothing. But his eyes held me pinned. He wasn't looking at a servant or Omega or a piece of the scenery, he was looking at me. At the strain in my posture, at the frantic beat of the pulse in my throat, at the sheer, exhausting effort it took to hold my form so still, to make myself a void. He saw the shadow and he was studying its edges. Our Alpha Borin faltered in his speech, noticing the king's distraction. He followed Kael's gaze and his face darkened with confusion and irritation. "Your Majesty," Borin said, his voice too loud, shattering the fragile silence between the king and me. "Pay her no mind, that is just Elara, our Omega." He spat the title like a curse, a final, definitive branding. I flinched, waiting for the king's gaze to shutter with understanding and dismissal. It did not. Instead, Kael's head tilted, just a fraction. His stormy eyes held mine, and in their depths I saw not agreement, but a quiet, intense curiosity. He saw the deep, quiet pain I carried, and he did not look away from it. He acknowledged it. Then he did the most terrifying thing of all. He gave a single, slow, deliberate nod. It was not a command. It was not a greeting. It was a recognition, a silent message that passed between us, bypassing our Alpha, bypassing the entire pack. "I see you." As quickly as it began, it was over. He turned back to Borin, the mask of the polite monarch back in place. "Your hospitality is noted," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the ground beneath my feet. The pack exhaled, the tension broken. They began to move and chatter again, the strange moment already forgotten by them. But I stood frozen behind the woodpile, my hand pressed to my racing heart. The ghost had been seen, the shadow had been named, and the walls I had spent a lifetime building felt, for the first time, terrifyingly thin. The ghost had been seen. The thought was a tremor that would not still, a fissure running through the very foundation of my being. Long after the Alpha King had been led away to the great hall, I remained pressed against the rough-hewn logs of the woodpile, the phantom weight of his gaze still upon me. My heart was a frantic, caged thing beating against my ribs, and the familiar mantra of nothing, no one felt like a lie now. He had looked at me and seen someone. The pack's energy, once buzzing with excitement, had shifted into a fever pitch of preparation for the evening feast. It was a command performance, and every wolf, from the highest warrior to the lowest servant, had a role to play. Mine was to be a silent vessel, to serve and fade, to be as forgettable as the air, but the king's gaze had poisoned that well. Now, every glance felt like a potential recognition, every brush of a shoulder a test I was about to fail. The great hall was a cacophony of sound and scent. Roasting meat, spiced wine, the musky odour of too many wolves in close quarters. The fire in the central hearth roared, its heat pressing in on me, making the air thick and difficult to breathe. I moved along the edges, my tray of empty goblets held tight against my chest like a shield, my eyes fixed on the floor. But I was hyper-aware of him. Kael. He sat at the high table next to Alpha Borin, a mountain of calm in the swirling chaos. He spoke little, his storm-grey eyes observing the room, and I felt each pass of his gaze like a physical touch, a brand on my skin. I tried to shrink, to make myself smaller than I ever had before, but the memory of his nod was a hook in my soul, pulling me toward a surface I did not want to break. And then I saw him, Cassian. He was holding court with a group of young warriors, his arm slung possessively around Lyra, the she-wolf he had chosen over me. He threw his head back and laughed, a loud, booming sound that cut through the din and speared me right through the heart. The memory of my rejection, usually a dull ache, flared into a sharp, fresh agony. The heat in the room became suffocating. The laughter and chatter twisted into a distorted, mocking roar. The walls seemed to pulse inward. I can't breathe. The thought was a panicked whimper in my mind. The tray in my hands trembled, the goblets rattling a warning. The edges of my vision began to darken, speckles of black and silver dancing like malevolent fireflies. I was losing my grip. The walls inside me, the ones that held back the ocean of my pain and the faint silver echo of my wolf, were crumbling. I was going to shatter right here in front of everyone. I was going to be truly, utterly seen in the worst possible way, as a broken, hysterical thing. I took a stumbling step backward, desperate for the wall, for a shadow to swallow me, but my legs were liquid. This was it. This was the end of my careful, silent existence. Then a presence materialized beside me. It was not an aggressive intrusion. It was a simple, solid blocking of the chaotic energy. The overwhelming sense of the feast was suddenly overlaid with the clean, sharp aroma of winter pine and cold stone. The distorted sounds of the feast faded into a dull background hum. I looked up, my vision swimming. It was him. Alpha King Kael. He stood not facing me directly, but angled slightly away as if observing the room, his broad shoulders creating a barrier between me and the rest of the pack. He did not look at my panicked face, my trembling hands. He did not touch me. His gaze was on a simple, wild-growing vine of moon blossom that had crept in through a crack in the stone wall near my head, its white flowers glowing in the firelight. His voice, when he spoke, was low, a quiet rumble meant for my ears alone. It was not a command. It was not a question. The most mundane, ordinary question in the world. "This vine," he said, his tone conversational, almost idle, "it grows with such determination, even in this hard place. Does it have a name?" The world stopped its dizzying spin. My mind, which had been a screaming vortex of panic, latched onto his words like a lifeline. They were an anchor thrown into my storm, a simple, concrete thing to focus on. I stared at the moon blossoms, their delicate petals a stark contrast to the rough stone. I swallowed, my throat tight. My voice, when it came, was a hoarse, unused whisper. "Moon blossom." I cleared my throat, forcing the words out. It only blooms at night. The scent is sweeter then." He was silent for a moment, his eyes still on the vine. I could feel the solid, steady calm radiating from him, a stillness so profound it began to seep into my own frantic energy. "It finds its strength in the quiet hours," he murmured, more to himself than to me, "when there is less noise to drown it out." He didn't say anything else. He didn't look at me again. After a moment that stretched into an eternity of peace, he simply moved away, returning to the high table as silently as he had come. I stood there, my heart still beating too fast, but the panic had receded. The darkness at the edge of my vision was gone. The tray in my hands was steady. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the sweet scent of the moon blossom filling my lungs. He had not rescued me. He had not made a grand gesture that would draw more attention. He had simply stepped into the storm with me and given me a single steady point to focus on until it passed. I looked at the moon blossom, then at his retreating back. The fissure inside me didn't feel like a crack leading to collapse anymore. It felt like a seed buried deep in hard, frozen ground that had just felt the first, faint touch of the sun. The seed, once touched by the sun, would not be ignored. In the days that followed the feast, the memory of the moon blossom and the low, steady rumble of Kael's voice became a quiet mantra I repeated to myself. The pack continued its frantic dance around the Alpha King, a whirlwind of displays and feats of strength meant to impress him. I moved through it all, performing my duties, but I was no longer just a ghost. I was a creature caught between two worlds, the familiar, crushing weight of my nothingness, and the terrifying, fragile possibility of being something. The pull to my clearing in the woods became an ache, a physical need. The four walls of my closet-like room felt like they were pressing in on me, and the constant, watchful eyes of the pack felt like shards of glass against my skin. I needed the silence. I needed the moss and the dappled light. I needed to feel the faint silver echo within me, if only to assure myself it was still there, that the anchor Kael had thrown me hadn't severed that last, fragile tether. I slipped away as the moon began its ascent, a pale silver coin in the violet sky. The path was a balm, the rustle of leaves and the scent of damp earth washing away the residual clamour of the pack. When I stepped into the clearing, I felt my shoulders drop. The breath I hadn't realised I was holding finally releasing in a long, weary sigh. I went to my log, my fingers tracing the familiar grooves in the bark. Closing my eyes, I reached inward. "I'm here," I thought into the silence. "Are you?" The response was not a flicker of weariness this time. It was a quiet pulse, a soft, silver hum. It felt curious. It felt like it was listening. "I was not sure if you would return to this place." The voice did not startle me. It was as if the clearing had been waiting for it, as if the very air had been holding its breath for his arrival. I opened my eyes. Kael stood at the edge of the trees, not intruding, but simply present. He was not wearing his royal finery, just simple, dark trousers and a tunic, making him look less like a king and more like a warrior, weary from a long journey. The moonlight caught the sharp planes of his face, softening the stern lines. My first instinct was to flee, to revert to the shadow, to mutter an apology and disappear. But the memory of the anchor held me fast. I simply watched him. "It is your sanctuary," he continued, his voice low, respecting the quiet of the glade. "I did not mean to trespass." "You're not," I heard myself say, the words soft but clear. It's just a clearing." He took that as the invitation it was, stepping fully into the moonlight. He did not come to sit beside me, but leaned against the trunk of the great oak, a respectful distance away. His gaze was not on me, but on the canopy above, as if reading stories in the stars. "Sanctuaries are rare," he said after a long moment, "and necessary. In my castle, there is a tower room that no one enters but me. The windows face the mountains. Sometimes I go there just to remember what silence sounds like." I stared at him, this king who spoke of loneliness in a place of absolute power. He was sharing a secret, a vulnerability. He wasn't demanding mine, he was offering his first. "It must be loud," I whispered, "the weight of a crown." He looked at me then, and the weariness in his storm-grey eyes was so profound it stole my breath. "It is a constant roar," he admitted, the truth raw and unvarnished. The roar of expectations, of politics, of 1,000 people needing something from you. Sometimes the most difficult part is that in the middle of that crowd, you have never felt more alone. He paused, his gaze intense. "It is a unique kind of silence, the silence that surrounds a king." My heart ached for him. This giant of a man, this legend felt as isolated as I did. Our cages were different, but the lock felt the same. The words rose in my throat before I could stop them, pushed out by a sudden, desperate need to offer him something in return for his truth. A fragment of my own. They have a day for it," I said, my voice barely audible. I looked down at my hands clenched in my lap. "A celebration. The anniversary of my rejection. They call it the Day of Unburdening. They feast and laugh and toast to Cassian's freedom from his defective mate." I risked a glance at him. His expression had not shifted to pity, which I would have hated. Instead, there was a deep, focused stillness. He was listening, truly listening. "It's not the rejection that hurts the most," I confessed, the words feeling like shards of glass being pulled from an old wound. "It's the celebration of it, the way my greatest pain became their favourite holiday." The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with a profound, aching understanding. The moon continued its slow climb, painting the clearing in shades of silver and blue. "A pack that celebrates the breaking of one of its own," Kael said, his voice a low, dangerous ripple in the quiet, "has forgotten what it means to be a pack." It was not comfort. It was validation, a simple, stark statement of truth that acknowledged the wrongness I had been forced to accept as my due. In that moment, he did not see a defective Omega. He saw an injustice. The walls around my heart, so carefully built over a lifetime, did not come crashing down. They simply softened. They developed a crack wide enough to let a sliver of moonlight in. He pushed away from the tree. "The silence here is a gift, Elara. Do not let anyone take it from you." And then he was gone, melting back into the shadows from whence he came, leaving me alone with the moon, the moss, and the newly resonant hum of the silver wolf within me. For the first time, the echo did not feel like a ghost, it felt like a companion. And the thought that followed was both terrifying and exhilarating. I was no longer completely alone. The validation was a warmth in my chest that lasted through the night, a small, glowing ember against the perpetual chill of my existence. For the first time, the memory of the Day of Unburdening didn't feel like a brand of shame, but a mark of their failure, not mine. Kael's words. "A pack that celebrates the breaking of one of its own has forgotten what it means to be a pack," had reframed my entire world. The problem was not my brokenness, but their cruelty. The ember was still warm the next morning as I carried a basket of freshly laundered linens toward the Elder's Lodge. The path took me past the training grounds, a place I usually avoided. The clash of wood and the grunts of effort were a symphony of a world I was barred from. Today, however, my steps felt lighter, my gaze less fixed on the ground. I dared to glance over, my eyes instinctively seeking one figure among the many, and I found him. Kael stood on the sidelines, observing the sparring matches with Alpha Borin. He wasn't watching the fighters with any great interest. His gaze was distant, as if his mind was still back in the moonlit clearing. Then, as if feeling the weight of my attention, his eyes shifted from the fighters and found mine. There was no smile, no nod. But there was a recognition, a deep, steady acknowledgement that passed between us. It was the same look he had given me in the clearing, a look that saw the person, not the shadow. In that moment, I felt the ghost of his quiet strength, the memory of his stillness, and it wrapped around me like an invisible shield. The shield was tested instantly. "Watch where you're going, defective." The voice, sneering and familiar, sliced through the momentary peace. Rorik, a burly warrior and one of Cassian's closest friends, stepped directly into my path, blocking my way. He was sweaty from training, his chest puffed out, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. This was a dance we had done 100 times before. He would postured, I would shrink, and he would walk away satisfied. My body tensed, every muscle screaming the old, familiar script. Drop your gaze, mumble an apology, make yourself small. Endure. My heart began its frantic caged bird rhythm. The basket in my hands felt suddenly heavy, the weight of every insult, every slight, every day of unburdening piling up inside it. I could feel the eyes of the other warriors on us, sense their lazy anticipation of the usual spectacle. I could feel Cassian's gaze from somewhere on the field, indifferent. The old panic, the one that promised safety in disappearance, began to rise in a hot tide. But then my eyes flickered back to Kael. He hadn't moved. He made no move to intervene, to play the chivalrous king. That would have shattered everything, proving I was still someone who needed saving. Instead, he simply stood there, his arms crossed, his gaze holding mine across the distance. In his stormy eyes, I saw no expectation of my surrender. I saw a quiet, unwavering belief. He was waiting. He was bearing witness. He had shared his vulnerability with me, and now he was offering me the space to find my own strength. The ember of validation in my chest flared into a small, defiant flame. Rorik leaned in, his voice a low growl. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Or are you just too stupid to form words?" The old Elara was trembling, begging to submit. But the new Elara, the one who had been seen in the moonlight, who had been handed an anchor in a storm, who had been told her pain was valid, took a slow, deep breath. I felt the silver hum within me, no longer a faint echo, but a steady, supportive thrum. I lifted my chin. I did not go away from Rorik's surprised face. My voice, when it came, not tremble, it was quiet, but it was clear. A single, solid stone dropped into the stagnant pond of this moment. No. The word hung in the air, simple and absolute. Rorik blinked, his smirk faltering. Confusion, then irritation, flashed in his eyes. "What did you say to me?" I said no, I repeated, my voice gaining a fraction of strength. "I will not get out of your way. You will move." The silence that fell over the training grounds was profound. The clattering of practice swords had stopped. Every eye was on us. I saw shock, disbelief, and in a few, a flicker of something that might have been respect. Rorik's face flushed with anger. He was not used to being denied, especially not by me. He took a half step forward, his size meant to intimidate. But I held my ground. The basket of linens was no longer a burden. It was my anchor to the earth. I would not be moved. He stared at me, his jaw working, but the spell was broken. The easy victory he was used to was gone. With a disgusted grunt, he shouldered past me, muttering a foul name under his breath. He moved. He moved. I stood there, my entire body trembling, not with fear, but with the aftershock of my own courage. I had done it. I had chosen to stand. Slowly, I turned my head and looked back toward Kael. He gave me that same, almost imperceptible nod from our first meeting, but this time I understood its meaning completely. It wasn't just a recognition of my presence. It was a salute. I continued my walk to the Elder's Lodge, my steps no longer light but sure. The seismic shift was not in the ground beneath my feet, but in the foundation of my own soul. I had chosen myself. And I knew, with a certainty that felt as solid as the earth, that I would never ever unchoose me again. The victory was a fire in my veins, bright and intoxicating. For the rest of the day, I carried the echo of that single powerful word, no, like a shield. The pack stairs, which usually felt like shards of ice, now seemed to slide off me, unable to penetrate the new solid core of my being. I had stood my ground. I had chosen myself. But as the sun set and the camp settled into a wary quiet, the fire began to change. The exhilaration faded, and in its place, a strange, restless energy began to hum under my skin. It was the silver wolf, but it was no longer a faint, sorrowful echo. It was a pulse, a steady, growing drumbeat that matched the frantic rhythm of my heart. The cage I'd spent a lifetime reinforcing was not just cracked. A whole bar had been sheared off, and the creature inside was stirring, testing its boundaries. That night, the nightmares did not come as vague shapes of fear. They were vivid, visceral. I was running on 4 powerful legs, the forest a blur of silver and shadow around me. The earth thrummed with my passage. The wind sang in my fur. It was freedom, pure and ecstatic. Then the scene shifted. I was back in my frail human body, but the power was still there, boiling under my skin, a torrent with no outlet. I looked down at my hands and watched, horrified, as the skin split and reformed, silver light bleeding from the cracks. I was coming apart at the seams. I woke with a gasp, drenched in a cold sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted to escape. The phantom sensation of shifting, of tearing, was so real I clutched my hands to my chest, expecting to find them mangled. They were whole, but they tingled with a strange electrical current. The following days were a slow descent into a new kind of terror. The internal drumbeat grew louder, a constant pressure behind my eyes. My senses were heightened to an agonizing degree. The scent of roasting meat was nauseating. The chatter of the pack, a deafening roar. I was jumpy, on edge, the solid core I had felt now feeling more like a fault line about to give way. The worst was the loss of control. It happened in the storage cellar, as I was reaching for a jar of preserves. A surge of frustration, at my own fear, at the constant noise, welled up in me, hot and sudden. A spark of silver light, sharp and real, flickered at the tip of my index finger. It was there and gone in an instant, but it left a ghostly afterimage, burned onto my vision. I stared at my hand, my blood running cold. It happened again the next day when a pot clattered to the floor behind me, startling me. A shower of silver sparks, like minuscule stars, erupted from my hands before I could clench them into fists. I was breaking. The defiance had been a mistake. I had agitated the delicate balance of my suppression, and now the dam was failing. The power I had hidden for so long was going to tear me open from the inside out. The thought was a paralyzing dread, colder than any rejection I had ever faced. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I moved through my duties like a spectre once more, but this time, it wasn't by choice. It was the dazed, frantic wandering of someone who knew they were a walking catastrophe. He found me like that, late one afternoon. I was in a secluded corner of the herb garden, supposedly weeding, but in reality I was just kneeling in the dirt, staring at my traitorous hands, waiting for the next sign of my disintegration. I didn't hear him approach, but I felt his presence. The calm, steady hum that had once been an anchor. Now, it felt like a spotlight on my shame. Elara, I flinched, curling my hands into my chest. I couldn't look at him. He had seen my strength. I couldn't bear for him to see me falling apart. Look at me. His voice was gentle, but it was not a request. Slowly, reluctantly, I lifted my gaze. He was crouched a few feet away, his stormy eyes searching my face. He saw the shadows under my eyes, the tremor in my hands, the sheer raw panic I could no longer hide. It's happening, I whispered, the words tearing from a raw throat. I'm losing control. There's light. I'm breaking. The confession felt like a death sentence. Kael was silent for a long moment, his gaze intense. He didn't look surprised. He looked understanding. Describe it to me, he said, his voice low and steady. The feeling. It's a pressure. I stammered, my eyes welling with frustrated, terrified tears. It's like something is trying to get out. And when it does, it's silver. It's like I'm coming apart. He nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to my clenched fists. When a bone is broken, the body must create a chaos of inflammation, of pain, of heat, to knit it back together. It is a violent, messy process. To the bone, it must feel like it is shattering all over again. His eyes met mine, holding them with a powerful certainty. But it is not shattering, Elara. It is healing. It is becoming stronger than it was before. I stared at him, my breath catching. You are not breaking, he said, each word a deliberate, solid stone laid down for me to stand on. You are not a dam about to burst. You are a seed, finally feeling the sun after a long winter, and the shell that protected you for so long is now cracking because the life inside it is too strong to be contained any longer. He reached out, not to touch me, but to gesture toward my hands. It is not a sign of your destruction. It is a sign of your life, of your power. It is not a leak. It is the first breath of the creature you were always meant to be. The words settled over me, seeping into the cracks of my fear. Healing, not breaking. A seed, not a dam. The pressure in my chest didn't vanish, but its meaning transformed. The hum under my skin was no longer a warning siren. It was the vibrant, potent hum of growth. I looked down at my hands, and for the first time, the memory of the silver light didn't fill me with dread, but with a fragile, awe-filled wonder. The cage was not breaking. The self I had built to survive was simply making way for the self who was meant to live. The reframing was a revolution. Healing, not breaking. The words became a new mantra, one that I whispered to the humming, restless energy under my skin. The pressure was no longer a terrifying prelude to explosion, but the ache of a muscle being used for the first time in years. The occasional flicker of silver light from my fingertips was no longer a failure of control, but a spark of life, a tiny celebration of the strength pushing its way to the surface. I did not seek out the clearing that evening. I was drawn to it, pulled by a need to be in the one place where this new, raw version of myself felt not just accepted but understood. The moon was a sliver sharper than the night before, casting sharper shadows and brighter highlights. I sat on my moss-covered log, but I did not curl in on myself. I sat with my spine straight, my hands resting palms up on my knees, and I breathed. I reached inward, not with a desperate plea, but with a quiet, tentative greeting. I'm here, I thought. I'm listening. The response was immediate, a wave of warmth, of recognition. It wasn't a frantic scrabbling at the walls of its prison anymore. It was a presence, waiting patiently on the other side of a door I was finally learning how to unlock. It felt less like a separate entity and more like the deepest, most essential part of me, the part that had never agreed to be small, the part that had never believed I was nothing. I felt him before I heard him. The air in the clearing shifted, the nocturnal sounds pausing for a heartbeat before resuming. Kael stepped into the moonlight, and this time his presence felt as natural and necessary as the ancient oak. He came and sat beside me on the log, not with the distance of a king, but with the quiet companionship of a friend. Our shoulders didn't touch, but I could feel the warmth of him, a steady, solid comfort. We sat in a silence that was deeper than the absence of sound. It was a silence filled with the thrum of my own awakening spirit and the profound stillness of his understanding. After a long while he spoke, his voice low and melding with the whisper of the leaves. The legends my tutors drilled into me, he began, his gaze fixed on the star-dusted canopy above, spoke of the silver wolves as forces of nature, unstoppable in battle, a power to be coveted or feared. He paused, and I felt the shift in him, a shedding of that old impersonal knowledge. But there were other stories, older ones, the ones my grandmother would tell by the fire. He turned his head, and his stormy eyes captured the moonlight, holding me in their gentle gravity. She spoke of them as guardians of balance, beings of profound emotional wisdom. Their strength wasn't in their teeth or their claws, but in their perception. They could feel the truth of a heart, sense the fractures in a soul, and their power was a healing light, not a destructive force. They were the silent counselors to kings, the calm in the centre of the storm. Tears, hot and sudden, pricked at my eyes. He was not describing a weapon, he was describing a soul. My soul. He was giving a history to the very essence of what I was, a history of value and purpose, not of defect and shame. They were never meant to be caged, Elara, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, imbued with a tenderness that made my breath catch. They were meant to be listened to. He shifted fully to face me then, his expression one of such intense, reverent focus that I felt truly seen down to the marrow of my bones. A spirit like that? It shouldn't be called wolf or beast, he murmured. It deserves a name. A title that honours what it is. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, hopeful rhythm. I could only watch him, mesmerised. He was silent for a moment, his gaze turning inward as if searching for the perfect word in some ancient, sacred language. Then his eyes found mine again, clear and certain. Lumina, he said, the name falling from his lips like a blessing, like a secret finally spoken aloud. I would call her Lumina, for the light she carries. Not a harsh light, but the kind that guides, that reveals truth, that makes things grow. Lumina. The moment the name touched my ears, it settled in my soul. It was a key sliding into a lock I hadn't known existed. Inside me, the presence, Lumina, did not just stir, she sang. A wave of pure, undiluted joy, of recognition, of gratitude flooded through me, so potent it stole my breath. It was the feeling of a lost child finally hearing its true name called across a crowded room. A single, warm tear escaped and traced a path down my cheek. It was not a tear of sadness, but of a homecoming so profound it shook me to my core. He had not just seen the shadow, or the cracks, or the strength, the very light of my soul, and he had not flinched from its brilliance. He had knelt before it, and with the utmost respect given it a name. Lumina, I repeated, my voice thick with emotion, testing the sound on my own tongue. It felt right. It felt like me. In that moment, the last vestiges of the defective Omega crumbled to dust. The walls did not just have cracks. They dissolved entirely, not in a chaotic crash, but in a gentle, inevitable sigh. I was not Elara, the rejected, and a separate hidden wolf. I was Elara, who carried Lumina within her. Whole, seen, cherished. I looked at Kael, this king who wielded power not to command, but to affirm, and I knew with a certainty that eclipsed everything I had ever known. This was not about a mate bond of fate or destiny. This was about a meeting of souls. He had given me the greatest gift imaginable, the return of my own self, beautifully, respectfully named. And in the sacred silence of the moonlit clearing, I began the journey of learning how to finally, fully be her. The name Lumina was a suit of armor woven from starlight. It settled around me, not as a weight, but as a definition. For the next few days, I moved through the pack with a new kind of quiet. It was not the silence of submission, but the stillness of a deep flowing river. The frantic energy under my skin had coalesced into a steady silver hum, a constant comforting reminder of the presence within. I was Elara, and I contained Lumina. The two were no longer at war, they were learning to breathe as one. But the pack, sensing a shift in the fundamental order of their world, grew restless. My refusal to be cowed by Rorik had been a ripple. This new unshakable calm was a tidal wave they could feel coming, and it terrified them. Whispers followed me, sharper and more venomous than before. They could not name the change in me, but they knew it challenged the story they had built around my existence. The catalyst came on the eve of the king's departure. A final feast was called, a more sombre affair than the first. The air was thick with unspoken questions about the alliance and the king's prolonged, quiet interest in their most worthless member. I could feel Cassian's gaze on me throughout the evening, heavy with a confused resentment. I ignored it, focusing on the solid, reassuring presence of Kael at the high table. Our eyes would meet occasionally, and in his I saw no king, but the man from the clearing, the one who had named my soul. I was clearing the high table, my movements efficient and calm, when Cassian finally broke. He stood, his chair scraping loudly against the stone floor, and strode toward me. He didn't look at Kael. His fury was for me alone. This was not the casual cruelty of Rorik. This was personal. This was the architect of my pain come to inspect his crumbling work. He stopped directly in front of me, blocking my path. The hall fell silent. "You've forgotten your place, Elara," he said, his voice low and dripping with contempt. I said nothing. I merely looked at him, and in my gaze I held all the quiet certainty that Lumina and I had found. My silence infuriated him more than any retort could have. His eyes narrowed and he leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper meant for my ears alone, a deliberate, cruel echo of the words he had spoken years ago in the Rejection circle. "You are nothing," he hissed. The words meant to be a final, definitive hammer blow. "You are no one. A defective, broken thing. Do you think his attention changes that? It only proves his poor judgment. You will always be the Omega I cast aside. That is the only truth of you." The words were the same. The intent was the same. To annihilate me, to reduce me back to the hollow shell he believed I was. For a heartbeat, the old terror rose, a ghost of the pain that had once defined me. It clawed at the edges of my newfound peace, threatening to pull me back into the abyss. This was the choice. The clearest one I had ever been given. I could let his words in, I could believe them, fold in on myself, and revert to the nothingness he demanded I be. It would be easy. It was the well-worn path of least resistance. Or I could fight back, not with my hands, but with my truth. My eyes flickered from Cassian's hate-filled face to Kael. He was standing now, his body coiled with a tension that could unleash devastating violence in a heartbeat. Every line of him was ready to intervene, to tear Cassian apart for this final vicious assault. And in his stormy gaze, I saw the message, clear and unwavering. Your choice. I will honor it. He would not save me. He was giving me the even greater gift of saving myself. He believed I could. I looked back at Cassian. The ghost of my old pain receded, burned away by the brilliant, steady light of Lumina's joy, her strength, her name. The pressure inside me was no longer a hum, it was a chord, resonating through every fibre of my being, demanding to be heard. You are wrong, Cassian, I said, my voice not loud, but clear and solid, carrying in the dead silence of the hall. It did not tremble. The rejection was not the truth of me. It was the truth of you. His face contorted in shock and rage. You dare! I am not broken, I continued, the words flowing from a deep, artesian well of truth I had only just discovered. I was suppressed, I was hidden, but I was never defective, and I am done hiding. This was it, the breaking point, not of me, but of the cage. Cassian, enraged beyond reason, his entire worldview shattered by my defiance, roared and lunged for me, his hand outstretched to grab my arm, to physically enforce his will and put me back in my place. As his fingers neared my skin, time seemed to slow. I saw the hatred in his eyes. I felt the collective gasp of the pack. I felt Kael's protective fury, held in check by his profound respect for me, and I made my choice. I did not step back. I did not raise my hands to fight him off. I simply stopped suppressing. I stopped fighting the light. I stopped being afraid of the power. I let go. I opened the door and I welcomed Lumina home. A silent, concussive wave of silver energy erupted from my core. The world did not explode. It bloomed. The concussive wave of silver energy was not an attack. It was an exhalation. A sigh of release that had been held for a lifetime. It washed over the great hall, not with destructive force, but with a transformative gentleness, snuffing out the torches and leaving only the pure ethereal light that now radiated from me. Cassian was thrown backward, not from impact, but from the sheer, awe-inspiring pressure of the light, landing in a heap several feet away, his face a mask of stunned terror. But I barely noticed. A profound peace descended upon me, silencing the last frantic whispers of fear. This was not a loss of control, it was the ultimate act of it. I was not being torn apart, I was being put back together. I closed my eyes. I did not fight. I did not struggle. I simply chose. I chose to stop hiding. I chose to stop apologizing for my own existence. I chose to believe Kael's words, that I was healing, not breaking. I chose to honor the beautiful name he had given the deepest part of my soul. I chose to believe that I, Elara, was worthy of taking up space in the world. I chose myself, and the universe answered. The transformation was not the bone-snapping, agonizing contortion I had been taught to fear. It was a seamless unfolding, a sigh of relief from my very cells. It was painless. It was serene. It was the most natural thing I had ever done. I felt my consciousness expand, not as a violation, but as a homecoming. The fractured pieces of my soul, the timid omega, the hidden silver wolf, the woman being seen by a king, slid into perfect, glorious alignment. There was no more separation. There was only wholeness. I felt the soft brush of mossy earth beneath paws that were both new and eternally mine. I felt the whisper of air through a coat of living silver, each strand seeming to be woven from captured moonlight. I felt a strength that was not about dominance, but about presence, a deep, unshakable rootedness in my own being. I opened my eyes. My new eyes, seeing the world with a crystal clarity I had never known. The hall was bathed in the soft luminescence of my own form. I saw the pack members, their faces frozen in various states of shock, fear, and awe. I saw Cassian, scrambling backwards, small and insignificant, and I saw Kael. He stood exactly where he had been, bathed in the silver light. The tension for a fight was gone from his body, replaced by a stillness of pure wonder. His stormy eyes were wide, reflecting not a monster, not a weapon, but me. Lumina, Elara. His gaze held no fear, no calculation. It held only a reverence so deep it was a language of its own. I took a step forward, my movement fluid and graceful. I was not monstrously large, a beast of intimidation. I was powerful, yes, but it was the power of an ancient forest, of a flowing river, of the moon itself, a power that was simply inherently part of the natural order. My form was elegance and strength intertwined, my fur shimmering with a soft internal light, my eyes holding the calm wisdom of the ages. I was the living embodiment of the legends Kael's grandmother had told, a guardian of balance, a being of emotional wisdom. I turned my head, my gaze sweeping over the pack that had called me defective. There was no anger in me, no desire for revenge. There was only a quiet, unassailable truth. The lie they had built their world upon had just crumbled, and the reality standing before them was more magnificent than any of them could have ever imagined. I was not their shame. I was their living miracle. And in the profound silence, I lifted my head, and for the first time I let my true voice be heard. It was not a howl of challenge, but a song of completion, a clear, beautiful, resonant sound that echoed through the stone hall, a melody of freedom, of acceptance, of a soul finally, joyfully coming home. It was the sound of a choice made and a self fully and completely claimed. The echo of my true voice faded, leaving a silence so absolute it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. The silver luminescence that pulsed from my fur was the only light in the great hall, painting the stunned, frozen faces of the pack in shades of moonlit awe and terror. I could feel the weight of their gazes, 100 different shocks, 100 shattered perceptions. The defective Omega was gone, and in her place stood a myth made flesh. But only one gaze mattered. Kael. He stood amidst the wreckage of their reality, his own form a pillar of calm certainty. The awe in his eyes was not for the power I wielded, but for the truth I represented. He did not see a legendary silver wolf. He saw Elara, he saw Lumina, he saw the woman from the clearing, whole and free at last. And then he moved. He did not rush. There was no hesitation in his steps, only a profound and deliberate purpose. The pack watched, a collective, silent gasp hanging in the air as the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the realm, walked toward the radiant celestial creature I had become. He did not stop until he was directly before me. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body, could see the flecks of silver light dancing in the stormy grey of his eyes. He was so close, a human man before a being of power and legend. And yet I felt no disparity. I felt only a perfect, balanced stillness. His eyes held mine, and in their depths I saw everything. I saw the memory of the shadow he had first noticed. I saw the anchor he had offered in the storm. I saw the quiet understanding in the moonlight, the validation of my pain, the gift of my name. I saw the man who had believed in my strength enough to let me find it for myself. This was not a confrontation. It was a completion. Slowly, never breaking our gaze, Kael went down on one knee. It was not a kneel of submission. It was not the bow of a subject to a sovereign. His posture was straight, his head held high. This was the kneel of a knight, of a partner. It was a gesture of profound respect, an acknowledgement of equality. He was lowering himself, not because I was above him, but because he was placing himself at my level, honouring the truth that stood before him. The silence in the hall deepened, becoming something sacred. "My strength," he said, his voice a low, clear rumble that vibrated through the very stone beneath our feet, "has never been for conquest." His eyes, locked with mine, were blazing with a truth he had perhaps never spoken aloud. "It has always been a shield, a shelter. It has always been meant to guard the peace of those who cannot guard their own." He paused, letting the words settle into the soul of everyone present. "But you do not need my shield, Elara. You do not need my shelter." His gaze softened, filled with a love so deep and so real, it made the silver light within me burn brighter. "You have your own peace. You have your own strength, and it is more beautiful and more powerful than any I have ever known." He drew a breath, offering his heart, his life, his kingdom with his next words. "My strength is yours, not to protect you, but to stand beside yours. My kingdom is yours, not as my subject, but as my equal. My heart is yours, if you will have it." The words were not a command, they were a question, a plea, an offering. Inside me, Lumina did not roar in triumph. She sighed in contentment, a purr of absolute rightness that resonated through my entire being. The separation was gone. The human and the wolf, the fear and the strength, the past and the present, it all coalesced into a single, integrated, radiant whole. I was Elara, and I was Lumina, and we were loved for all that we were. The brilliant silver light that enveloped me began to soften, to gently recede. The transformation back was as serene and painless as the first. It was not a diminishing, but a focusing. The powerful, graceful wolf form dissolved not into the frail, nervous woman I had been, but into a new version of myself. I felt the mossy earth become solid stone beneath my human feet, felt the silken fur recede into smooth skin, but the power, the peace, the wholeness, that remained, thrumming gently under my skin, a permanent part of my soul. I stood before him as a woman, clad in a simple dress that seemed humbled by the residual glow that clung to me. My back was straight, my chin was level, and my eyes, I knew, held the same ancient calm they had possessed moments before. I was fully integrated. I was whole. I looked down at Kael, still on one knee before me, his gaze unwavering, his pledge hanging in the air between us. I did not speak. Words were too small, too fragile for this moment. I simply reached out my hand. It was not the trembling, hesitant hand of a servant. It was the steady, sure hand of a queen, of a partner. He looked at my offered hand, and a look of profound, soul-deep relief and joy washed over his features. He reached up, and his fingers closed around mine. His grip was not possessive, but affirming. It was a seal. As our hands joined, a different kind of energy filled the hall, not the explosive power of my shift, but a warm, golden wave of healing and hope. It was the energy of a new beginning. He rose to his feet, our hands still clasped, and turned to face the pack. He did not need to say a word. The image was enough. The Alpha King and the Silver Wolf Queen, standing as equals, their joined hands a bridge between the old world and the new. My people, Kael's voice rang out, clear and commanding, yet filled with a warmth I had never heard in him before. You have witnessed a miracle tonight, not the birth of a weapon, but the return of a queen. The age of shadows and suppression is over. I looked out at their faces, no longer with fear or anger, but with a calm authority. I saw Cassian, his head bowed in shame and defeat. I saw Alphaborin, his face pale with the realization of his own failings. And I saw others, their eyes wide with a dawning hope, with the first flicker of a new kind of loyalty. I turned my gaze back to Kael, to the man who had seen the shadow and chosen to illuminate it, who had seen the cracks and called them healing, who had seen my soul and given it a name. The ghost was gone. The cage was dust. The rejected Omega had chosen herself, and in doing so had found not just her own power, but a love built on the unshakable foundation of mutual respect. We stood together, king and queen, not because fate had decreed it, but because we had chosen each other, two whole souls who had finally found their way home. Here is your text returned verbatim, exactly as you provided it. And so the rejected Omega, who hid her light for so long, finally found a love that cherished her, not in spite of her power, but because of it. Her story is a reminder that our greatest strength is often found not in changing who we are, but in having the courage to finally, fully be ourselves. If this journey of healing, power, and a love that kneels in respect resonated with you, then you've come to the right place. This channel is dedicated to telling the stories of characters who rise from the shadows to claim their destiny. We explore the broken places and the glorious healings, the quiet moments and the epic transformations. I want to invite you to become a part of our pack here. By subscribing to the channel, you're not just watching a story, you're choosing to stand with us. You'll never miss a new tale, and you'll be the first to know when the next captivating saga begins. So don't just listen to stories about finding your strength. Like and subscribe, and let's continue discovering it together. Thank you for listening. Until the next story.